What is the biggest culture shock you have ever experienced? Japan. The ticket to events has a number and everyone lines up strictly according to that number. Yep, they managed to arrange hundreds of people outside the venue in the order they bought their tickets. And it's fair. The earlier you bought your ticket, the better your chance to get a good spot and grab limited merch, which usually sells out in minutes. When the venue opens, the staff call out each number. Once yours is called, you can enter. This is always the case, like whether it's a small 20-person gig or a major festival. And another thing, even after 2 days of a festival, the venue remains spotless. Not a single bottle, not a single wrapper, nothing. I've been to Summer Sonic, Fuji Rock, and Osaka Met Rock. I grew up in a pretty rough neighborhood. A lot of crazy stuff happened there, stuff we won't get into now. Let's just say that by a fairly young age, I felt like I'd seen a lot. In middle school, I became friends with a kid who lived in a trailer park on the other side of town. Kids from the trailer park, that's a whole other level of poverty. I remember the first time I went there, my friend said, "Let's go to the creek. Darius has a fishing pole again." Okay, whatever that meant. We get to the creek and there's Darius fishing with about 12 kids gathered around watching him. Every now and then, he'd reel in a fish and hand it to one of the kids who'd run off happily with it. Finally, he catches another one, hands it to my friend, and the two of us head back to his trailer. My friend takes the fish, just like that, puts it straight into the microwave, hits start, and when it beeps, pulls it out and starts eating it with a fork. I almost threw up. When a massive Maori man asked me to greet him by touching noses, the guy looked stern until I finally gathered my courage and went in first, pressing my nose to his. Then, his face lit up with one of the most genuine smiles I've ever seen on a guy that huge. Once I watched kids in Mexico snacking on fried crickets like they were popcorn, and there were also 4 or 5-year-olds selling gum at 10 p.m. Oddly enough, my biggest culture shock happened when I returned to America after several years in Albania. In Albania, there are no international restaurant chains or fast food. Everything is local and usually incredibly delicious. When I first went to Albania, I was mentally prepared. I knew it would be a different country where everything would feel unfamiliar, and it was. Most shops were the size of my bedroom back home. Open-air markets and roadside stalls were everywhere. Few people owned cars, everyone walked or used public transport. But when I returned to the US, I was just going home and didn't think much of it. So yet, after years away, I had the weirdest reaction. The day after landing, we went to Costco. And so wandering that store was one of the most surreal experiences of my life. The food packages were enormous, and there was just so much of everything. Everywhere we went, we drove cars, and I realized my small hometown didn't even have proper bus service. That was my biggest culture shock, and it was about my own country. Visited the US and saw toilets filled to the brim with water. How are you even supposed to use one without getting your backside wet? And don't get me started on New York taxis. They honk at everything. A pedestrian doesn't cross the street fast enough the millisecond the light turns green. Honk. A car slows down. Honk. A bird lands on the road. Honk. A bee flies into the cab. Honk. A streetlight changes. Honk. The drivers there are next level aggressive. I'm Norwegian, but I spent a year in New Zealand. The culture shock for me was how open Kiwis are in general, and how they practically don't have the concept of stranger danger. As a typical Norwegian introvert, it took me some time to adjust. You meet a stranger, and they immediately invade your personal space, start touching your shoulder, and launch into stories about their cousin's rash and weekend plans. The even bigger shock was returning to silent Norway afterward. I don't know if this counts as culture shock. It was more of a gradual realization since I'd been visiting Italy regularly since childhood. But when I turned 15, I started noticing how Italian men would ask me out and simply wouldn't take no for an answer. In the UK, if you reject a guy, he usually takes it calmly unless he's completely unhinged. But Italy was a whole different story. I'd say no to strangers, to friends I'd known for years, even to guys I'd just met. All seemingly normal people, yet so persistent that I'd either have to walk away or pretend my cousin was my boyfriend. Once I prepared a romantic candlelit dinner at home for my girlfriend. Midway through the meal, she mentioned how the candles reminded her of her family's extreme poverty. They had to literally time their candle usage. Every minute counted. Homework, for instance, was done collectively because a single candle wouldn't last long. It still hurts to remember this. When I was a child living in New York, my elementary school organized an overnight trip to Washington. As we sat in traffic near the White House entrance, just across the street, there was a barrel with flames. Homeless people huddled around it for warmth, right across the street. Edited. I was about 9 years old at the time. This happened in the late 1980s. I lived on Long Island. I'd seen homeless people during trips into the city before, but the jarring contrast of such poverty against the backdrop of the White House gave me my first real culture shock.